Every divorced mother knows the hollow ache of watching her children's eyes search for reassurance, wondering if she's failed them before they even cross the threshold. Jessica Morgan felt that familiar weight in her chest as she stood before the crumbling Victorian house on Maple Street, her 8-year-old twins, Oliver and Sophia, clutching her hands with uncertain grip. She'd bought this rundown place with her last savings, hoping that determination could rebuild what her marriage couldn't hold together. The house needed everything: new floors, working plumbing, a roof that didn't leak memories of better days. But Jessica saw it as their chance to create something beautiful together. $28,000 for a house that had probably been worth 10 times that in its prime. "Is this really our home?" Sophia asked, her practical nature already assessing the peeling paint and sagging porch. "It will be," Jessica replied, squeezing her daughter's hand. "Every weekend, until we make it beautiful enough for always." Now, as she watched Oliver and Sophia hesitantly explore their new weekend home, she wondered if she'd bought them a dream or a nightmare. The bitter custody battle with Michael hung over her like a storm cloud. Her ex-husband's words echoed, "You can't even keep a stable job. How can you provide a stable home?" The thought of losing her children made her chest tighten with panic. Oliver ran his small hands along the wall, fascinated by the faded wallpaper that peeled at the corners like old skin. "This house is really old, isn't it, Mom?" "Built in 1962, Jessica replied, pulling out the folder of documents from her bag. "That makes it older than Grandpa Daniel when he taught me how to design buildings." The mention of her father brought a familiar ache. Daniel Morgan had been a master architect who could make spaces sing with possibility. He died 3 years before the twins were born, but his worn drafting tool sat in Jessica's car, waiting to bridge another generation. Jessica had learned everything about building from her father, except, apparently, how to build a marriage that lasted. "Can we see our rooms?" Sophia asked, always practical. Jessica led them up the creaking staircase, testing each step before letting them follow. The house groaned and settled around them like an old woman getting comfortable in her chair. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms opened off a central hallway, each with tall windows that had once offered views of well-tended gardens. "This one's mine," Oliver declared, running into the room that faced the backyard. Afternoon sunlight streamed through windows that needed new glass, casting geometric patterns on the scuffed hardwood floor. Sophia chose the room next door, smaller but with a window seat that looked out toward the street. "I can watch for you when you come to pick us up," she said quietly, and Jessica's heart clenched at the unspoken assumption that she wouldn't be staying. "Actually," Jessica said, sitting down on the window seat beside her, "I was thinking maybe I could stay here too. Fix the place up. Make it our home for when you visit." The twins exchanged one of those silent conversations that 8-year-olds perfected, a language of glances and slight nods that excluded the adult world. "Dad says you don't have anywhere else to live," Oliver said, with the brutal honesty of childhood. "That's partly true," Jessica admitted, "but mostly, I want to build something with you two, something that's just ours." They spent the afternoon exploring the house room by room, Jessica making notes on a yellow legal pad while the twins called out discoveries. The kitchen was a disaster. Cabinets hanging askew, linoleum curled at the edges, a sink that had given up trying to drain properly. The bathroom upstairs had working water but questionable plumbing. The basement smelled like old newspapers and forgotten dreams. But there were also surprises. Beautiful crown molding in the dining room. A bay window in the living room that would flood the space with morning light once the plywood was removed. Hardwood floors throughout that might shine again with enough work and patience. Jessica's trained eye noted junction box placement, load-bearing walls, copper pipes that would need replacing versus ones that could be salvaged. She estimated costs in her head. $600 for new electrical panels to replace the outdated fuse system. $2,200 for bathroom plumbing alone. Another $3,000 for new windows. a daunting sum for a woman who'd watched her architectural design business collapse alongside her marriage. As the sun began to set, Oliver suddenly froze in the backyard, pointing to something moving in the overgrown garden. "Mom, look!" Among the tangled weeds and broken lattice emerged a dog, old and thin, with graying muzzle and cautious eyes. He approached slowly, dignity intact despite his ragged appearance. "He's so skinny," Sophia whispered, kneeling slowly. The dog wore a tarnished metal tag. Jessica gently turned it over to read, "Max, 42 Maple Street. The house's address." "That's our address," Oliver said, eyes wide with wonder. "He belongs to this house." "I don't think he's been cared for in a long time," Jessica said, noting the dog's ribs showing through his dull coat. "Let's get him some water." As evening approached, Jessica made dinner on a camping stove she'd brought, while Max watched from a careful distance, eventually accepting food from her hand. They sat on the living room floor eating sandwiches, the twins chattering about their plans for decorating their rooms, occasionally offering tidbits to Max, who had settled nearby. "Mom," Sophia said suddenly, "why didn't you and Dad want to live in the same house anymore?" The question hung in the air like dust motes in the fading light. Jessica had been dreading this conversation and preparing for it in equal measure. "Sometimes grown-ups forget how to be happy together," she said carefully. "Your dad and I both love you more than anything in the world, but we couldn't figure out how to love each other the way we used to." "Because you worked too much," Oliver said, matter-of-factly. "That was part of it," Jessica acknowledged. "I thought I was working hard to take care of our family, but I was actually working so much that I forgot to spend time with the family I was trying to take care of." "Are you going to work too much now?" Sophia asked. Jessica looked around the room that would need new drywall, fresh paint, and probably electrical work before it felt like home. "I'm going to work hard on this house," she said, "but only when you are here to help me." The twins considered this with the seriousness of contract negotiators. "Deal," they said in unison. As they cleaned up their makeshift dinner, a gentle knock came at the front door. Jessica opened it to find an elderly woman holding a covered casserole dish. "I'm Eleanor Clark," she said with a careful smile. "I live next door. I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." "Jessica Morgan," she replied, accepting the warm dish gratefully. "These are my children, Oliver and Sophia." Mrs. Clark's eyes crinkled with genuine warmth as she looked at the twins. "This house has been quiet for too long. It needs the sound of children again." "Did you know the people who lived here before?" Sophia asked, her curiosity always leading her conversations. Something flickered across Mrs. Clark's face so quickly that Jessica almost missed it. "A long time ago," she said carefully. "They were good people. I hope you'll be happy here." After she left, Jessica found herself standing in the doorway, watching her walk back to her neat bungalow next door. There had been something in her voice when she mentioned the previous owners, a weight that spoke of stories left untold. "Mom, can we sleep here tonight?" Oliver asked, interrupting Jessica's thoughts. Jessica looked around the empty house with its questionable heating and uncertain plumbing. Every reasonable part of her mind said it was too soon, too risky, too much like the impulsive decisions Michael had accused her of making. But when she saw the hope in her children's faces, the eagerness to claim this place as theirs, she found herself nodding. "We'll need sleeping bags," she said, "and we should probably check that the heat works." They made a quick trip to the nearby Walmart, returning with sleeping bags, battery-powered lanterns, and enough snacks to survive a weekend camping trip. Max was waiting on the porch when they returned, rising stiffly as if he had been guarding their absence. As they set up their makeshift beds in the living room, Jessica felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose that went beyond simply getting through each day. The house settled around them as darkness fell, creaking and sighing like an old friend getting comfortable. Max circled 3 times before settling at the foot of the twins' sleeping bags, a self-appointed guardian. Jessica lay awake long after the twins had drifted off to sleep, listening to the sounds of her new home and thinking about the work ahead. Her father's drafting tools waited in the car, filled with instruments of creation and transformation. Tomorrow, they would begin the real work, not just of the house, but of themselves. The morning brought autumn sunshine streaming through windows that needed cleaning, and Jessica woke to find Oliver already awake, sketching plans for his room on the back of a fast food napkin. Sophia was still curled in her sleeping bag, but her eyes were open, watching dust motes dance in the golden light. Max sat alertly by the front door, ears perked toward something outside. "Morning, architects," Jessica said, stretching muscles that protested sleeping on a hardwood floor. "Ready to see what this old place really looks like in daylight?" The daylight inspection was both encouraging and daunting. The house had good bones, solid foundation, straight walls, a roof that needed work but wasn't catastrophic. But every room revealed new challenges. The kitchen cabinets were held together more by habit than hardware. The bathroom upstairs had a window that wouldn't close and a medicine cabinet that hung at a precarious angle. "This is going to take forever," Sophia said, though her tone suggested she found the prospect exciting rather than discouraging. "Good thing we have forever," Jessica replied, pulling out her father's drafting tools for the first time since the divorce. The familiar weight of the worn leather case in her hands brought back memories of Saturday mornings spent learning the difference between elevation and floor plans. The satisfaction of a drawing that captured exactly what was in her mind. The quiet pride in her father's voice when Jessica mastered a new technique. The twins gathered around as she opened the case, revealing tools that had designed dozens of houses over 3 decades. Each implement had its place, worn smooth by hands that had known exactly how to use them. "Grandpa Daniel's tools," Oliver said reverently. He had only vague memories of his grandfather, but Jessica had told them stories about the man who could make anything out of lines and determination. "Now there are tools," Jessica said, handing Oliver a small compass that had been her first when she was about the same age. "But we use them carefully, and we use them together." They started with the simplest project, removing the damaged kitchen cabinets. Jessica showed the twins how to turn off the water supply, how to disconnect plumbing connections, how to remove screws that had been painted over so many times they had become part of the wood. "Why are we taking everything apart before we put it back together?" Sophia asked, her logical mind seeking patterns in the apparent destruction. "Sometimes," Jessica said, prying loose a cabinet that had been installed with more enthusiasm than skill, "you have to see what you're really working with before you can make it better. These cabinets look like they're attached to the wall, but really, they're just covering up problems." As if to prove her point, the removal of the lower cabinets revealed water damage that had rotted the drywall behind the sink. Jessica used a moisture meter to test the surrounding areas, explaining to the twins how to identify the extent of water penetration. The studs behind the sink showed signs of mold, and Jessica pointed out the discoloration, explaining how improper sealing had allowed water to seep in over years. "Is the whole house broken?" Oliver asked, poking at the soft, damaged wall with his finger. "No," Jessica said, though privately she wondered how much damage they would uncover as they dug deeper. "Think of it like surgery. We have to fix the sick parts before we can make the healthy parts stronger." The work was slower with 8-year-old helpers, but Jessica found herself grateful for their presence. They asked questions she wouldn't have thought to answer, noticed details she might have overlooked, and brought an energy to the project that reminded her why she had fallen in love with building in the first place. Mrs. Clark appeared at the back door around noon, carrying a thermos of hot coffee and a plate of homemade cookies. "Thought you might need refreshments," she said, settling into a kitchen chair that Jessica had managed to salvage from the demolition. "This is very kind of you," Jessica said, accepting the coffee gratefully. The twins immediately gravitated toward the cookies, which appeared to be chocolate chip with something extra that made them taste like childhood memories. "I've been watching this house for years," Mrs. Clark said, her eyes scanning the damage they had uncovered, waiting for the right family to bring it back to life. "Have there been other people interested in buying it?" Jessica asked. Something passed across Mrs. Clark's face again. That same shadow Jessica had noticed the night before. A few inquiries over the years, but no one who seemed right for the house. "What makes us right?" Sophia asked, her direct approach cutting through adult politeness. Mrs. Clark smiled, but her eyes remained serious. "This house needs people who understand that some things are worth saving, even when they seem broken beyond repair." After she left, Jessica found herself wondering about her choice of words. There had been an intentionality to her phrasing that suggested she meant more than just the physical structure of the house. The afternoon brought their first real success. Working together, they managed to remove all the damaged cabinetry and clean up the debris. The kitchen looked worse than when they started. Bare walls, exposed plumbing, a floor that revealed the full extent of the water damage. But it also looked honest. No more hiding behind facades that had been covering up problems. "It looks terrible," Sophia observed. "It looks like it's ready for us to make it better," Jessica corrected, and realized she was talking about more than just the kitchen. It was Oliver who made the discovery that would change everything. He had been working on a section of baseboard near the old refrigerator space, prying carefully at the painted wood, when his small pry bar slipped and punched through the drywall behind it. "Oops," he said, looking at Jessica with the expression of a child who wasn't sure if he was in trouble. "It's okay," Jessica said, kneeling down to examine the hole. "Sometimes you have to break a few things to—" She stopped mid-sentence. There was something in the wall cavity. Something that caught the light from her flashlight and gleamed gold. "What is it, Mom?" Sophia asked, crowding close to see. Jessica reached into the hole, her fingers closing around something small and metallic. When she pulled her hand out, she was holding an old brass key, tarnished with age but still solid and well-made. The twins stared at the key with the fascination children reserve for genuine mysteries. Max, who had been dozing in a patch of sunlight, suddenly perked up, trotting over to sniff at the key with intense interest. "Where did it come from?" Oliver asked, taking the key from Jessica's palm and turning it over in the morning light. "Someone must have dropped it inside the wall during construction," Jessica said, though even as she spoke she wondered. The key looked deliberate, placed rather than dropped. "Keys like this usually open something important like a treasure chest," Sophia said, her practical nature momentarily overwhelmed by possibility. "Maybe," Jessica said, though her mind was already cataloging the locks in the house they had yet to explore. They spent the next hour testing the key on every lock they could find. The front door, the back door, the basement door that had been painted shut for decades. None of them fit. The key was too small for the exterior doors, too large for most of the interior hardware. "Maybe it opens something that's not in the house anymore," Oliver suggested as they sat on the front porch steps, stumped by their failure to solve the mystery. "Or maybe," Sophia said with the logic of someone who read mystery novels above her grade level, "it opens something that's hidden." Jessica looked at her daughter with new respect. "That's good thinking. What makes you say that?" "If you hide a key inside a wall, you're probably hiding it because you don't want just anyone to find it. And if you don't want just anyone to find the key, then whatever it opens is probably hidden too." The search for hidden locks became the day's obsession. They examined every piece of furniture that had been left in the house, every cabinet that still had doors, every drawer that hadn't been removed. Max followed them from room to room, his attention unusually focused, as if he understood their mission. It was while they were examining the living room more closely that Sophia made the second discovery of the day. "Mom, look at this," she said, running her fingers along the wood paneling on the wall behind an old writing desk. Jessica came over to see what had caught her attention. At first, she saw only the same tired paneling that covered most of the downstairs walls. But as Sophia traced a pattern with her finger, she began to see what her daughter had noticed. Carved lightly into the wood, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right, were letters and numbers. LB1 1969, safe. What does that mean? Oliver asked, tracing the carved letters with his own finger. Jessica felt something cold settle in her stomach. She thought about Mrs. Clark's reaction when Sophia had asked about the previous owners, the careful way she had chosen her words. I think we need to do some research, she said quietly. The Millbrook Public Library was a 15-minute drive from the house, a brick building that had served the community since the 1940s. Jessica had fond memories of bringing the twins there when they were younger, before the divorce had divided even their simple traditions into her weekends and Michael's weekdays. Mrs. Augusta Patterson, the librarian who had helped them find picture books when the twins were 4, greeted them with surprised pleasure. Jessica Morgan, I haven't seen you folks in ages. How are you, Oliver and Sophia? We're fixing up an old house, Oliver said, with the excitement of someone who had discovered a new passion. And we found a mystery. Mrs. Patterson's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of a librarian presented with a research challenge. What kind of mystery? Jessica explained about the house, the key, and the carved initials. Mrs. Patterson listened with growing interest, then led them to a section of the library Jessica had never explored, the local history collection. If your house was built in 1962, we should be able to find records of the original owners, she said, pulling out a thick binder labeled Millbrook Property Records, 1961 to 1970. It didn't take long to find what they were looking for. The Lawson family had indeed built and owned 1247 Maple Street. Henry Lawson, his wife Margaret, and their children Laura and Michael. Laura Lawson. LB. Can we find out what happened to them? Sophia asked, her mystery novel instincts in full gear. Mrs. Beadle, Patterson's expression grew more serious. Let me check the newspaper archives, she said, moving to another section of the collection. The newspaper archive was kept on microfilm, and Mrs. Patterson showed Jessica how to operate the reader while the twins peered over her shoulder at the screen. They started with 1970, the year the house had been sold, and worked backward. They found the story in the October 15, 1969 edition of the Millbrook Gazette. Local family missing. Police are searching for Henry Lawson, 34, his wife Margaret, 32, and their children Laura, 10, and Michael, 8, who have not been seen since October 10th. Lawson, an accountant with Carter Construction, failed to report to work on Monday. Neighbors became concerned when the family's car remained in the driveway and mail began accumulating. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Millbrook Police Department. Jessica felt the twins go very still beside her as she read the article aloud. What happened to them? Oliver asked in a small voice. Jessica continued searching through subsequent editions, but the follow-up stories offered no answers. The search continued for several weeks, then faded from the news. The Lawson family had simply vanished, leaving behind a house, a life, and questions that were never answered. That's really sad, Sophia said quietly. Yes, it is, Jessica agreed, though her mind was racing with implications she didn't want to share with the children. A missing accountant, a hidden key, carved initials that included the word safe. The pieces suggested a story that was darker than simple disappearance. They drove home in contemplative silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the Lawson family and the house that had once been their home. Jessica found herself wondering what had happened in those rooms where her children now played. What fear or desperation had driven someone to hide a key inside a wall? As they pulled into the driveway, Mrs. Clark emerged from her house as if she had been watching for their return. Max, who had been waiting on the porch, trotted down to greet them, his tail wagging tentatively. Find anything interesting at the library? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Jessica looked at her more carefully, noting the way she kept glancing at the house, the tension in her shoulders that spoke of long-held secrets. We learned about the Lawson family, she said carefully. Mrs. Clark nodded slowly. They were good people. They deserved better. Mrs. Clark, Jessica said, did you know them? For a long moment, she was silent. Then she looked at Oliver and Sophia, who were watching the conversation with the intense focus of children who sensed adult secrets. I knew Laura, she said finally. She was my friend before they went away. The twins exchanged one of their silent conversations, and Jessica could see questions forming in their eyes that she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Mrs. Clark, Sophia said with a directness that was her trademark, do you think they're coming back? Mrs. Clark's expression grew infinitely sad. No, sweetheart, I don't think they're coming back, but I think maybe they left something behind, something important. She looked meaningfully at the brass key that Oliver was still carrying in his pocket. Some things, she said quietly, are hidden because they need to stay safe until the right person finds them. As she walked back to her house, Jessica realized that their weekend renovation project had become something much more complex. The house wasn't just offering them a chance to build something new. It was asking them to uncover something old, something that had been waiting in the walls for someone with the tools and the courage to find it. That night, after the twins had fallen asleep, Jessica sat in the empty living room, holding the brass key and thinking about 10-year-old Laura Lawson, who had carved her initials into the wall with a message about something safe. Whatever she had hidden, she had trusted that someday someone would find the key and understand what it meant. The weight of that trust settled on Jessica's shoulders like a responsibility she hadn't asked for, but couldn't ignore. Max padded over and laid his head on her knee, his old eyes watching her with what seemed like understanding. She scratched behind his ears, wondering how long he had been guarding this house and its secrets. What are we getting ourselves into, Max? She whispered. The dog sighed, a sound that contained neither answer nor judgment, just the quiet companionship of a creature who had seen more than she could imagine. The week between visits felt longer than usual. Jessica found herself thinking about the Lawson family during her shifts at the temporary drafting job she'd taken to pay for renovation supplies. Every time she used her tools, she wondered what Henry Lawson had been working on in his last days. What had made an accountant's family disappear without a trace? When Friday evening came, Jessica picked up the twins with a trunk full of new supplies and a head full of questions she wasn't sure she should be asking. Did you think about the key all week? Oliver asked before Jessica had even pulled away from Michael's house. Every day, Jessica admitted. Sophia drew pictures of what she thinks it might open, Oliver reported. Show her, Sophia. Sophia produced a notebook filled with sketches, treasure chests, secret doors, hidden rooms. Her artistic skill was impressive for an 8-year-old, but more than that, her imagination had clearly been captured by the mystery. These are really good, Jessica said, flipping through the pages. You've been thinking about this scientifically. Dad says you can solve any problem if you think about it long enough, Sophia replied. He also says you're good at finding things that other people miss. The compliment, delivered secondhand through her ex-husband, touched Jessica more than she expected. Michael had always been better at seeing her strengths than she was. Back at the house, they approached their search with new, systematic determination. Jessica had spent time during the week researching the layout of houses built in the early 1960s, particularly those built by Carter Construction. If Henry Lawson had hidden something in his own house, he would have chosen a location that was both secure and accessible. We're going to search each room completely before moving to the next one, Jessica explained as they stood in the living room with the carved wall panel. Look for anything that seems out of place, any piece of furniture or fixture that doesn't match the others. Max, who had been waiting for them on the porch as usual, seemed unusually agitated. He paced from room to room, whining softly, his nose working frantically, as if trying to communicate something they couldn't understand. They started with the living room itself. The paneling was original to the house, Jessica determined, but some sections had been added or modified over the years. Working together, they mapped out which panels were load-bearing and which were purely decorative. It was while examining the baseboards that Sophia made a connection. "Mom, look at this," she said, running her fingers along the baseboard near the carved message. "This piece is different wood than the others." Jessica knelt down to examine what she had found. She was right. One section of baseboard appeared to be made from a different type of wood, stained to match, but not quite successfully. "Good eye," she said, pulling out her flashlight for a closer look. "This section has been replaced." Working carefully with a thin pry bar, Jessica loosened the replacement baseboard. Behind it, she found a small cavity that had been carved out of the wall stud, just large enough to hold something the size of a book. But the space was empty. "Someone already found it," Oliver said, disappointed. "Or," Sophia said thoughtfully, "someone moved it to a different hiding place." Jessica sat back on her heels, thinking. If Laura Lawson had carved the message about something being safe, and if the original hiding place had been compromised, where would a smart 10-year-old move something important? "Let's keep looking," she said. "But first, let's see what else is in this room." They examined every piece of furniture that had been left behind. A heavy oak dining table with drawers that stuck, a china cabinet with glass doors that rattled when the wind blew, a rocking chair that had been painted and repainted so many times that Jessica couldn't tell what the original wood had been. It was as they were walking through the upstairs hallway that Max's behavior changed dramatically. The old dog, who had been following them with restless energy all morning, suddenly stopped outside the bathroom door. He sat down firmly, his eyes fixed on Jessica, and gave a single, decisive bark. "I think he's trying to tell us something," Oliver whispered, wide-eyed. The upstairs bathroom was small and dated, with a medicine cabinet that hung crookedly and a bathtub that showed its age in rust stains and chipped enamel. But as Jessica examined it more closely, she began to see possibilities. The medicine cabinet was mounted on the wall between two studs, but the space behind it seemed larger than necessary for the depth of the cabinet itself. Working carefully, Jessica removed the mounting screws and lifted the cabinet away from the wall. Behind it was a cavity that extended deep into the wall, much deeper than standard construction would have required. And in that cavity, wrapped in oilcloth and preserved by 6 decades of dry storage, were the papers that Henry Lawson had died trying to protect. "We found it," Sophia breathed as Jessica carefully lifted the package from its hiding place. "Laura Lawson was a very smart girl," Jessica said, unwrapping the oilcloth to reveal a manila envelope stuffed with documents. Inside the envelope were dozens of papers, financial records, photographs, correspondence, and what appeared to be architectural plans for various construction projects around Millbrook. But it was the letter paper-clipped to the front of the collection that caught Jessica's immediate attention. In Henry Lawson's careful handwriting, it read, "To whoever finds these documents, my name is Henry Lawson, and I fear that my family and I are in grave danger because of what I have discovered about corruption in the Millbrook construction industry and city government. If something happens to us, please ensure these documents reach the proper authorities. The people of this town deserve to know the truth." The letter was dated October 8, 1969, just 2 days before the Lawson family had disappeared. Jessica looked at the twins, who were watching her with wide eyes that held both excitement and the dawning realization of what they had uncovered. "This is bigger than just a missing family, isn't it?" Sophia asked. Jessica nodded slowly, her mind already working through the implications of what they had found. Henry Lawson hadn't just been an accountant who had stumbled onto something dangerous. He had been a man who had chosen to document corruption even when he knew it might cost him everything. And now, 50 years later, his evidence was in the hands of another parent who would have to decide how far she was willing to go to honor the trust of a 10-year-old girl who had believed that someday someone good would find what her family had died protecting. Jessica spent the evening after the twins had gone to sleep studying Henry Lawson's documents by lamplight in the empty living room. What she found was a meticulous record of fraud, bribery, and corruption that reached into every level of Millbrook's government and business community. Lawson had been more than just an accountant for Carter Construction. He had been a man with a conscience who had started noticing irregularities in the company's books, projects that were billed to the city for twice their actual cost, materials that were charged as premium but delivered as standard grade, safety inspections that were passed without inspectors ever visiting job sites. But it was the photographs that made Jessica's blood run cold. Pictures of construction sites where corners had been cut so severely that the buildings would be dangerous to occupy. A school foundation that had been poured with substandard concrete. A hospital wing that had been built with electrical wiring that wouldn't meet even 1960s safety codes. Henry Lawson had documented everything, and in his careful notes, Jessica could see the evolution of a man who had realized that his discovery was bigger than simple embezzlement. People's lives were at stake. The names in the documents were ones that Jessica recognized from her research into the town's history. Mayor Richard Carter, Police Chief Thomas Mitchell, the James family who had owned the largest construction company in 3 counties. All of them, according to Lawson's evidence, had been part of a conspiracy that had prioritized profit over safety for decades. Jessica closed the manila envelope and sat back in the darkness, overwhelmed by the weight of what she had inherited: a missing family, evidence of crimes that might still be affecting people today, and the trust of a 10-year-old girl who had believed that the truth was more important than being safe. Max, who had been lying at her feet throughout her examination of the documents, raised his head suddenly, ears perked toward the front window. A moment later, Jessica heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Headlights swept across the living room wall as a car pulled into the driveway. It was too late for casual visitors, and no one knew they were staying overnight except Mrs. Clark. Jessica moved to the window, carefully peering out from behind the curtain. A black sedan had parked behind her car, effectively blocking her in. 2 men in suits were getting out, their faces illuminated briefly by the dome light. One middle-aged with silver at his temples, the other younger but with the same bearing. They moved with the confident stride of people accustomed to having their authority unquestioned. Max was on his feet now, a low growl building in his throat. Jessica put a hand on his collar, as much for her own comfort as to restrain him. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. The knock, when it came, was firm and insistent, the kind of knock that expected immediate compliance. Jessica hesitated, considering her options. The twins were asleep upstairs. Running wasn't possible with the car blocked in, and something told her that ignoring the knock wouldn't make these visitors go away. With a deep breath, Jessica moved to the door, Max at her side, his aged body suddenly tense with protective alertness. The men on her porch wore expensive suits that seemed out of place in Millbrook. The older man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Morgan," he said with the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance. "I'm James Carter from Carter Development. This is my associate, Mr. Mitchell. We'd like to speak with you about your renovation project." Jessica's blood went cold. Carter. Mitchell. These were names from Henry Lawson's documents, families that had been part of the conspiracy 50 years ago. "It's pretty late for a business call," Jessica said, not moving from the doorway. Max stood beside her, his hackles raised, a continuous low growl emanating from deep in his chest. Carter smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We heard you've been doing some interesting renovation work. uncovering some things that have been hidden for a long time. Behind her, Jessica heard one of the twins stirring in their sleep. Every protective instinct she possessed flared to life. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you?" Mitchell spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the flat menace of someone accustomed to intimidating people. "We understand you've been spending a lot of time at the library researching local history, asking questions about families that disappeared a long time ago." Jessica's mind raced. How did they know about her research? The library visits had been innocent enough, but apparently someone had been paying attention. "I'm just trying to learn about the house I bought," Jessica said. "Any homeowner would do the same thing." "Of course," Carter agreed smoothly. "And we're here to help. We'd like to make you an offer for the property, well above what you paid for it. Enough to buy something much nicer in a much better neighborhood. The house isn't for sale." "Everything's for sale at the right price," Mitchell said. "We are prepared to offer you $50,000 cash. You could close by the end of the week." Jessica felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. 50,000 was more than twice what she had paid for the house. Money that would solve all her immediate financial problems and give her the fresh start she desperately needed. It was also obviously a bribe disguised as a business proposition. "I appreciate the offer," Jessica said carefully, "but I'm not interested in selling. My children and I are happy here." The two men exchanged a glance that spoke of communications Jessica couldn't hear but could easily interpret. "Ms. Morgan," Carter said, his voice losing its veneer of friendliness, "I think you should consider our offer very carefully. This house has a history of bringing bad luck to the families who live in it." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Jessica felt her hands clench into fists, the old reflexes of someone who had learned to defend herself surfacing despite years of civilized restraint. "Are you threatening my family?" "Not at all," Carter said quickly. "We're simply concerned about your safety. Old houses can be dangerous. Structural problems, electrical issues, things that previous owners might have overlooked." "Mom," Sophia's voice came from behind her, small and worried. "Who are those men?" Jessica turned to see both twins standing in the living room doorway, their hair mussed from sleep, but their eyes alert with the instinctive wariness that children developed when they sensed adult tensions they didn't understand. "Just some businessmen who wanted to discuss the house," Jessica said, keeping her voice calm. "Go back to bed. I'll be up in a few minutes." But the twins didn't move. Oliver was staring at the men with the intense focus he usually reserved for puzzles he was trying to solve, while Sophia had stepped protectively closer to her brother. Max moved to stand between the men and the children, his posture alert but controlled. Carter noticed the children's attention, and his expression softened into what was probably meant to be a friendly smile. "Beautiful children," he said. "They must love having such a big old house to explore." "They do," Jessica said firmly. "And they're going to love it even more when we're finished fixing it up." "Of course," Carter agreed. "Though I hope you'll be careful during your renovations. Sometimes when people tear into old walls, they find things that are better left undisturbed." The message was clear enough that even the twins seemed to sense its meaning. Sophia moved closer to Jessica, while Oliver's expression shifted from curiosity to something approaching fear. "I think this conversation is over," Jessica said, starting to close the door. Mitchell put his hand against the door frame, stopping it from closing. "Think about our offer, Ms. Morgan. We'll give you until Monday to make your decision." "There's nothing to think about," Jessica replied, but Mitchell continued as if she hadn't spoken. 50,000 cash. No questions asked about anything you might have found while you've been renovating." The emphasis on the word renovating made it clear that they knew exactly what Jessica had discovered. Someone had been watching the house, monitoring her activities, reporting back to people who had a vested interest in keeping the past buried. "Monday," Carter repeated as the two men turned to leave. "We'll be in touch." Jessica watched them walk to the black sedan parked at the curb, noting the license plate number. and the way they both looked back at the house before driving away. Only when their car had disappeared around the corner did she close the door and turn to face her children. "Mom, those were the bad men, weren't they?" Oliver asked with the directness that Jessica had come to both love and dread in her son. "They might be connected to the bad men," Jessica said carefully, "but they can't hurt us as long as we're smart about what we do." "What did they want?" Sophia asked. Jessica sat down on the floor so she could look directly into their eyes. "They wanted to buy our house for a lot of money. More money than it's worth." "Why would they do that?" Oliver asked. "Because they don't want us to find anything else that Laura Lawson hid. And they definitely don't want us to tell anyone about what we've already found." The twins digested this information with the seriousness that the situation deserved. "Are we going to sell the house?" Sophia asked quietly. Jessica looked around the living room where they had made so many discoveries, where they had started building something together that was more than just a renovation project. The thought of giving up now, of letting the Lawson family's sacrifice be meaningless, made her feel sick. "No," she said firmly. "We're not going to sell the house." "Even though it might be dangerous?" Oliver asked. "Especially because it might be dangerous," Jessica replied. "Sometimes the most important thing you can do is the thing that scares you the most." Max settled between them, his warm presence a reminder that they weren't alone in this old house with its buried secrets. Jessica stroked his graying muzzle, wondering how much of the Lawson family's story he somehow knew, how long he had been keeping watch over the truth they had hidden. After the twins had finally gone back to sleep, Jessica made a phone call she had been dreading but knew was necessary. "Rachel, this is Jessica Morgan. You probably don't remember me, but we worked together about 5 years ago on the Riverside Development Project. I need some advice about a situation I've stumbled into. Something that might be related to the construction fraud case that ended my career." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Jessica Morgan, I remember you. The architect who found those safety violations and got blackballed for it. What have you gotten yourself into now?" "Something bigger than last time. Something that goes back decades and involves people who are still powerful in this town. I need someone I can trust to look at some documents I found." "Documents about what?" "About corruption in the Millbrook construction industry that goes back to 1969. And about a family that might have been killed because they tried to expose it." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Jessica wondered if the connection had been lost. "Jessica," Rachel finally said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much corruption to be surprised by it. "Are you sure you want to get back into this kind of thing? Last time didn't work out so well for you." Jessica thought about her failed marriage, her collapsed business, the years of doubt and self-recrimination that had followed her attempt to expose corruption in her own profession. "I'm sure," she said. "Some things are too important to walk away from, no matter what they cost." Rachel sighed, a sound that contained both resignation and respect. "Tell me where to meet you." The meeting with Rachel Diaz the following afternoon confirmed Jessica's worst fears. The former building inspector examined Henry Lawson's documents with professional scrutiny, her expression growing grimmer with each page. "This isn't just historical interest," Rachel said finally. "These buildings are still standing. That elementary school your kids attend, built by Carter Construction in '72, the county hospital where people are treated every day, renovated by Mitchell Associates in '85. She tapped a photograph showing substandard foundation work. "People are still living with these death traps." "So what do we do?" Jessica asked. "The FBI has a public corruption unit. I know someone, Catherine Webb. She's handled cases like this before." Rachel gathered the documents carefully. "I'll contact her tonight. In the meantime, Jessica, be careful. These people have protected their secrets for 50 years. They won't stop now." That evening, Jessica sent the twins to stay with Michael, making up a story about unexpected electrical work. She didn't tell them about the dark sedan that had cruised past the house 3 times that afternoon, or about the man in a business suit who'd followed her through the hardware store. "Something's going on, isn't it?" Michael asked when she dropped off the children. 5 years of marriage had left him attuned to her moods, even after the divorce. "I just need to handle some things at the house," Jessica replied evasively. Michael studied her face. "It's like the Riverside Project all over again, isn't it? You found something." Jessica hesitated, then nodded. "Something bigger this time. But I'm handling it." "Let me help," he said, surprising her. "Whatever our problems, Jess, I never wanted to see you destroyed the way those developers nearly did." "Keep the kids safe," she said. "That's how you can help right now." Returning to the empty house, Jessica felt both vulnerable and strangely liberated. Max greeted her with his usual dignity, but seemed agitated, pacing from window to door and back again. "You feel it too, don't you?" Jessica asked him. "Something's coming." She spent the evening securing the house as best she could, checking locks, moving furniture against the more accessible windows. She'd just finished when headlights swept across the front yard. But instead of stopping, the vehicle, a truck, not a sedan, continued down the road. False alarm. Jessica released the breath she'd been holding and turned back toward the kitchen. The crash of breaking glass sent her spinning around. Max's warning bark came too late as the back door splintered inward. 2 men in dark clothing surged through the broken door. Not Carter or Mitchell this time. These were workers, muscle, their faces hard with purpose. "Where are the documents?" the taller one demanded, not bothering with pretense. Jessica backed away, frantically scanning for a weapon, an escape route, anything. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play games, lady," the second man growled, advancing. "We know you found Lawson's papers. The boss wants them. Now!" Max lunged forward with surprising speed for an old dog, teeth bared in protective fury. The first man cursed, swinging a booted foot that caught the dog in the side with a sickening thud. Max yelped but kept his feet, positioning himself between Jessica and the intruders. Jessica's back hit the wall. Nowhere to run. The men advanced, one reaching inside his jacket. The front door crashed open with stunning force. Michael stood silhouetted in the entrance, his solid frame blocking the light. "Get away from her," he commanded, voice steady and dangerous. The intruders hesitated, weighing their options. 2 against 1, but Michael was 6'2" of former college football player, and the cold rage in his eyes suggested a man who remembered exactly how to use his size. "This isn't over," the taller one muttered, backing toward the broken door. "Tell your boss we want those documents by tomorrow, or we come back for the kids." Michael took a threatening step forward, and the men retreated, disappearing into the darkness beyond the yard. Jessica slid down the wall, legs suddenly unable to support her. Max limped to her side, whimpering softly. "Are you hurt?" Michael knelt beside her, the anger in his face replaced by concern. "I'm okay," Jessica managed. "But Max, they kicked him." Michael gently examined the old dog, who submitted to his touch with stoic dignity. "Bruised, but I don't feel anything broken. What the hell is going on, Jess? Who were those men?" Over the next hour, Jessica explained everything: the key, the documents, the Lawson family's disappearance, and the corrupt empire that had continued for generations in Millbrook. "So these Carter and Mitchell families," Michael summarized, "they're still profiting from cutting corners on construction projects, and they're willing to threaten a woman and her children to keep their secret." "It goes beyond that," Jessica said. "I think they killed the Lawsons 50 years ago. All 4 of them, including the children." She shuddered. "And now they've threatened Oliver and Sophia." Michael's expression hardened. "Not happening. Not while I'm alive." He pulled out his phone. "We need to call the police." "No!" Jessica grabbed his arm. "The documents show the police department was involved back then. We don't know who we can trust now. Then what's the plan? Rachel's contacting an FBI agent. Until then, we need to keep the kids safe and protect the evidence. Jessica looked at her ex-husband with newfound appreciation. Why did you come tonight? Michael shrugged, a gesture that couldn't quite hide his concern. Something felt wrong when you dropped off the kids. I know that look you get when you're scared but trying to be brave. So I circled back. He ran a hand through his hair. I might have failed at being a husband, Jess, but I never stopped caring about you. They spent the night at Michael's apartment, taking turns keeping watch while the twins slept, oblivious to the danger. Max curled protectively at the foot of their bed, despite his injured side. Morning brought a call from Rachel. Catherine Webb can meet us today, she said. She's taking this seriously. Bring everything you've got. The FBI field office was 3 towns over, a nondescript building that promised anonymity. Agent Webb was younger than Jessica had expected, but her sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor suggested competence beyond her years. What you've uncovered, Webb said after examining the documents, isn't just historical corruption. It's an ongoing criminal enterprise. These same families are still controlling construction contracts throughout the county, still using substandard materials, still falsifying inspections. Can you stop them? Jessica asked. We can do more than that, Webb replied. With your evidence connecting the historical crimes to current operations, we can bring RICO charges, pattern of corruption across generations. But we need something current to trigger federal jurisdiction. Like what? Like recorded threats, Webb said, sliding a small device across the table. Wear this. Get Carter or Mitchell on record offering money for silence, making threats, anything that shows they know about the Lawson documents and want to suppress them. Jessica stared at the recording device. You want me to go back there? After they sent men to attack me? It's your choice, Webb said. But without current evidence, this remains a historical curiosity. With it, we can end 50 years of corruption and find justice for the Lawson family. Michael, who had insisted on accompanying Jessica, spoke up. She won't be alone. I'll be there. Jessica thought about Laura Lawson, a 10-year-old girl who had hidden her father's evidence with the faith that someday someone would find it and be brave enough to use it. I'll do it, she said. The plan was simple, terrifying in its directness. Jessica would return to the house, alone in appearance but with FBI agents nearby. Michael would stay with the twins, guarded by additional agents. Webb expected Carter or Mitchell to make contact. The Monday deadline they'd mentioned approaching. Don't push too hard, Webb cautioned. Just let them incriminate themselves, and if anything feels wrong, get out immediately. Saturday night passed in tense preparation. Sunday morning, Jessica returned to the house on Maple Street, Max at her side, despite Michael's concerns about the dog's injury. He belongs here, Jessica insisted. He's been guarding this house and its secrets for years. The broken back door had been temporarily repaired, and Jessica made a show of continuing renovation work, removing damaged plaster from the living room walls. The waiting was the hardest part, knowing they were watching, knowing they would come, but not when or how. It was late afternoon when the black sedan pulled into the driveway. Not Carter and Mitchell this time, but an older man, expensively dressed, moving with the assurance of lifelong privilege. Max growled low in his throat. The man knocked once, imperious rather than polite. Jessica wiped plaster dust from her hands and opened the door, conscious of the recording device beneath her work shirt. Ms. Morgan, the man said, my name is Edward Carter. James is my son. I believe we have a situation that requires a more senior approach to resolve. Jessica let him in, keeping her expression neutral despite the hammering of her heart. Edward Carter, the patriarch, the one whose signature appeared on the fraudulent contracts from the 1960s. Mr. Carter, she acknowledged. I wasn't expecting company. Yet here I am. He surveyed the half-demolished living room with distaste. Quite an undertaking for a single mother. Though I understand your children aren't here today. The implicit knowledge that he'd been watching, that he knew her children's whereabouts, sent ice through Jessica's veins. What do you want, Mr. Carter? To improve my son's offer, not 50,000, 500,000. He named the sum casually, as if discussing the weather. For the house and for anything you might have found during your enthusiastic demolition. Jessica forced herself to breathe evenly. That's very generous. May I ask why this property is suddenly so valuable? Carter's smile didn't reach his eyes. Let's not play games, Ms. Morgan. You've been researching the Lawson family. You've been in contact with Rachel Diaz, who has a history of making inconvenient accusations against reputable businesses. It doesn't take much imagination to connect these dots. And if I don't accept your offer, Millbrook can be an unwelcoming place for outsiders who don't understand how things work here, Carter said, examining his manicured nails. Building permits denied, inspections that never quite pass, schools that suddenly have no room for new students, custody arrangements that get re-examined. He looked up, eyes cold. A shame for children to be caught in such uncertainty. Jessica felt sick. Sounds like you've been threatening people for a long time, Mr. Carter. Threatening? He looked offended. I'm offering you a way out of a situation that could become unpleasant. $500,000. A fresh start. All you have to do is give me the Lawson documents and forget you ever heard of them. The same way the Lawsons were forgotten? Jessica couldn't help asking. Something flickered across Carter's face. Not guilt, but wariness. The first crack in his composed facade. That was unfortunate business from a different time, he said carefully. Mistakes were made. Overreactions occurred. But that's ancient history. Not to their children, Jessica pressed. Not to Laura, who was 10 years old. Carter's expression hardened. My offer expires at noon tomorrow, Ms. Morgan. For everyone's sake, I suggest you accept it. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. After he left, Jessica collapsed onto a dust-covered chair, shaking with delayed reaction. She checked the recording device. It had captured everything. Threats, bribery, implicit admission of knowledge about the Lawsons. Enough, hopefully, for the FBI to move. She called Agent Webb immediately. I got it, she said. Everything you needed. Stay where you are, Webb instructed. We're on our way. But as Jessica hung up, Max began barking frantically at the front window. Outside, 3 vehicles were pulling up, Carter's black sedan returning, accompanied by a police cruiser and another unmarked car. Jessica's blood ran cold. Local police. Webb had warned her they might be compromised. She didn't wait to see who emerged from the vehicles. Grabbing Max's collar, she ran for the back door, slipping out into the gathering dusk. The old dog kept pace despite his injury, seeming to understand the urgency. They made it to the tree line at the edge of the property as voices called from the house. Men shouting, doors slamming. Jessica pulled out her phone to call Webb again, but there was no signal. We need to keep moving, boy, she whispered to Max. The dog looked at her, then deliberately turned and trotted toward the far corner of the property, looking back as if to say, follow me. Having no better option, Jessica did. Max led her to an overgrown path that wound behind neighboring houses, eventually emerging near Mrs. Clark's backyard. The elderly woman was in her garden, deadheading roses in the twilight. She looked up, unsurprised, as Jessica and Max approached. They've come for you, haven't they? She asked quietly. Jessica nodded, breathless. The FBI is on the way, but Carter got here first, with police. Mrs. Clark's mouth set in a firm line. Come inside, quickly. Once inside the neat bungalow, Mrs. Clark led Jessica to a small room at the back, filled with photographs and mementos. "I've been waiting 50 years for someone to find what Henry hid," she said, closing the curtains. "Laura told me her father was gathering evidence against Carter Construction. She was so proud of him." "You knew Henry wasn't just an accountant," Jessica realized. "I suspected," Mrs. Clark confirmed. "After they disappeared, I tried telling the police, but no one would listen." "A 12-year-old girl's theories about her missing friend?" She shook her head. "Eventually, I stopped talking. But I never stopped watching that house." "And Max?" Jessica asked, stroking the old dog's head. "Where did he come from?" Mrs. Clark's eyes filled with tears. 15 years ago, a man came to Millbrook. Older gentleman, quiet. He walked around the Lawson house for hours just staring at it. Next morning he was gone, but Max was there, sitting on the porch like he'd always belonged. Wouldn't leave, no matter who bought the place. "You think the man was—" "Michael Lawson," Mrs. Clark nodded. "Laura's brother. The only one who got away that night. He'd have been in his 40s by then. I recognized something in his eyes, though I couldn't be sure. He never spoke to anyone, never said who he was." Jessica looked at Max with new understanding. "He left his dog to guard the house, to wait for someone who would find the truth." A sudden pounding at the front door made them both jump. Max growled, positioning himself protectively. "Mrs. Clark," a man's voice called. "Police! We know Ms. Morgan is in there. Open up." Jessica's heart sank. "I'm sorry I brought this to your door," she whispered. Mrs. Clark straightened her shoulders, a flash of the determined 12-year-old girl visible beneath her aged exterior. "Laura was my best friend. I've been waiting half a century to help her." As the pounding intensified, headlights swept across the front windows. Multiple vehicles, engines revving. "FBI!" A woman's voice cut through the noise. "Everyone stand down. This is a federal operation." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Agent Webb and her team secured the scene, taking Carter and the compromised local officers into custody. Jessica surrendered the recording device, its contents downloaded and preserved as evidence. "You did it," Webb told her. "This, combined with the historical evidence and Rachel's documentation of ongoing violations, gives us everything we need to dismantle the entire operation." "What about the Lawsons?" Jessica asked. "Will we ever know what happened to them?" Webb's expression sobered. "We've opened a formal investigation into their disappearance. After 50 years, it won't be easy, but with the corruption angle established, we have new avenues to explore." Later that night, reunited with Michael and the twins, Jessica tried to explain what had happened in terms the children could understand. "The house had a secret," she told them. "A brave family tried to tell the truth about some bad men, and they got hurt for it. But they left clues for someone to find someday. Someone who would finish what they started." "Like us?" Sophia asked. "Like us," Jessica confirmed. "And thanks to what we found, those bad men can't hurt anyone else." Oliver had been unusually quiet, petting Max with focused attention. "Mom," he said finally, "did the Lawson family have a dog?" Jessica exchanged a glance with Michael. "Mrs. Clark thinks Max might have belonged to the Lawson's son, the one who might have escaped that night." "Why?" Oliver pulled something from Max's collar, a tarnished tag they'd never noticed, half hidden beneath the more visible one with the house address. "Because this says Max Lawson, 1969, Oliver said, holding it up. "I found it when I was checking if his side was still hurt." Jessica took the tag with trembling fingers. Beneath the tarnish and dirt, the engraving was clear. Not just the dog's name and date, but something else. Tiny letters that matched those carved in the wall panel. LB was here. Laura Lawson's final message, carried all these years by a dog who had waited faithfully for someone to find the truth. 3 months later, the house on Maple Street looked transformed. New windows gleamed in the autumn sunshine. Fresh paint brightened the Victorian trim, and the garden that had been so overgrown now bloomed with late flowers. The corruption case had expanded beyond anyone's expectations. 12 officials indicted. 3 construction companies shuttered. Mandatory inspections ordered for every public building in the county. And in a quiet ceremony attended by Jessica's family, Mrs. Clark, and representatives from the FBI, a small memorial was placed in what had been the Lawsons' backyard. Not a grave, their bodies had never been found, but a remembrance. A stone bench inscribed with words from Laura's hidden message. Some truths are worth protecting, no matter the cost. As Jessica watched the twins playing in the yard with Max, who had recovered from his injuries with the resilience of the truly faithful, she felt a sense of completion. The house had offered her more than she'd bargained for. Not just a renovation project, but a chance to rebuild justice from the ruins of corruption, to create something meaningful from the broken pieces of the past. Michael joined her on the porch. Their relationship transformed as well. Not reconciled as a couple, but strengthened as partners in something that mattered deeply to them both. "You know," he said quietly, "when you first bought this place, I thought it was another impulsive decision that would end badly." "It was," Jessica admitted, "just not in the way either of us expected." "The kids love it here," Michael observed. "They feel like they're part of something important." "They are," Jessica said. "We all are." Inside the house, the brass key that had started their journey hung framed on the wall, alongside a family photograph of the Lawsons in happier days, discovered among Mrs. Clark's mementos. A reminder that some doors, once opened, change everything that follows, and that sometimes the most important renovations are the ones you can't see from the outside.